Production funding for Over Here has been provided by gifts from Fred and Lou Hartwig of Roland Park and Mark and Nancy Gilman of Overland Park, Kansas.
World War II. We know by heart the images of heroism. The memories echo in our soul. America's men and women charged into the various war fronts all over the world, into combat and into history. The home front is often overlooked for the fighting fronts, but it was no less important. The massive buildup of weapons and supplies over here was as impressive as the fighting over there. Kansas City's home front was no exception. Hometown heroes rolled up their sleeves, wielding hammers and drill guns, donning civil defense helmets and armbands, standing united against a common enemy. This is the story of manpower, munitions, and military might. This is the story of Over Here. One sinister event set it all in motion, beginning on a quiet Sunday morning in December.
That was December 7th of 1941. It was a beautiful day in Kansas City.
Oh man, all of a sudden here come on the radio. Special notice, special notice.
I know the exact spot in that yard where I was standing when that announcement came to.
Well, I think we all knew it was going to happen eventually, but not that quick. Maybe just declaration of war, but it didn't happen that way. Surprise attack.
Instantly, America was yanked out of isolation and thrust into the world conflict.
And all of a sudden you found yourself saying, this is my home, they bombed my people.
It was not only shock and emotional, it was almost a physical feeling that everything looked just exactly as it had when I went home 2 or 3 hours earlier, and now everything was different.
The next day, everyone huddled around radios, listening to the words we feared.
It was a full assembly. Had the radio up on the podium, and we heard President Roosevelt's booming voice, you know, yesterday, the 7th of December, and then we knew we were at war.
Americans immediately asked the question, what can I do to help? While many able-bodied men and women joined the armed forces, others fought our foes by working in defense plants and volunteering wherever they could. But first and foremost in everyone's mind was preventing another surprise attack.
Everyone knew that submarines from both the Germans and the Japanese had been sighted on both coasts, and that ships had been out there, and that there really might be a real and present danger that we didn't feel in the Midwest so much.
Even with no immediate threat, Kansas City Civil Defense assigned air raid wardens and plane spotters to watch the skies. Armed guards were stationed at the river, stockyards, and public utilities, determined to protect our assets.
Got involved, very involved in civil defense. Of course, a lot of people thought that there was a chance that we would get bombed.
Early on, they would have what we would call now a disaster drill. If this happened, where would you go? How would you get people to the hospital? What would the fire trucks do if there was a bombing and this kind of thing?
32 buildings in the city were designated as bomb shelters. Sirens were installed throughout the city to alert citizens to air raids and blackouts.
We had a few blackouts, yes, pulling down the curtains, turning out the lights, staying inside, and you'd hear the sirens go off.
When there were no lights in the houses and no street lights, cars were not permitted to have their headlights on. It really did get dark.
My mother was one of the wardens, and she'd put on her hard hat, and she had a whistle, I believe, and her flashlight.
And I remember an embarrassing event when I was a child, when we had a light shining underneath a blind, and the local air raid warden came in and told us about it. But for some reason, I thought that was really embarrassing. Maybe it was going to cause us to lose the war or something.
Everyone volunteered. Girl Scouts and Campfire Girls rolled bandages for the Red Cross. Boy Scouts and American War Dads became auxiliary firemen and policemen, increasingly important duties as our men and women went off to war. But by 1943, enemy invasion seemed unlikely. So we switched from civil defense work to helping on ration boards with victory loan drives and Red Cross blood drives.
Everything was gold-driven in those days. War bonds, gold-driven, and blood, same thing. We would play that up and make every city feel that they had to reach their goal, by golly.
I believe that I was the first woman in Kansas City to belong to the Gallon Club. 2 men beat me. But I thought that was something I could do.
By July 1944, the Kansas City Red Cross had sent 156,000 pints of life-saving blood overseas, outranking all other cities except New York. Of course, we had a little help.
We call the Midwest Kansas City because we drew the blood from the people in Ottawa or Lawrence or wherever they were. But many times, because of the percentage, we were well over the goal. We even had people that would go through the line in the morning and they'd try to come back and go through again in the afternoon.
Kansas City was generous with money as well, buying war bonds to finance the war. Bond rallies featured German Messerschmitts, Japanese mini-subs, and our own military might, bringing the war close to home. Hollywood got involved, promoting the purchase of war bonds.
Any bonds today? Bonds of freedom, that's what I'm selling. Any bonds today?
Even schools had war bond drives.
We used to buy our stamps, our victory stamps over at the school for 10 cents a piece and put them in a book. And then when the book got filled up, you could take it and change it into a war bond.
And in those days, it wasn't a record stored in the computer. We actually got a bond, which we held on to.
Some of us concocted little poems and sayings. Buy an extra bond, folks. Set those villains up in smokes. If your father's in it, come on and let him win it. You know, to me it made sense.
Investing money and time in our country helped, but the sudden push for war materials tightened our belts further.
Everything was rationed, and you had to learn real quick to get along the best you could.
For them talking, our soldiers need, things more than we do.
Rationing began in January '42 to control prices and divert essential materials to the war effort. From butter and canned goods to bicycles and shoes, ultimately 20 household goods made the R list.
Every person, no matter how old or how young, had a ration book, a stamp book. And you had so many stamps a month for sugar, coffee, meat.
There was Meatless Tuesday, and that was kind of a point of pride, not to have meat on your table on Tuesday. Lots of macaroni.
Creative cooking became a challenge, especially when the first casualty of rationing was sugar. Sugarcane was processed into industrial alcohol, which was used to make explosives. Candy, chocolates, and cookies became luxuries.
We lived in a duplex upstairs, and the people lived downstairs from us was a lady and her little girl. One day she was coming home from the store, and she was standing on the porch. And she just had a little bitty sack about like this in her hand. She was holding a little brown sack. I asked her what she had in it. She told me it was gold dust. I said, really? It's gold dust? She said, well, not really. It's sugar. It might as well be gold dust.
The lack of sugar also posed another challenge for the homefront housewife.
We had a large victory garden, and because we canned a lot of things, a lot of our sugar didn't go on our cereal. It went in those jars.
Victory gardens cropped up everywhere as a way to offset wartime food shortages. No bare piece of land was safe from the sowing of carrots, lettuce, and potatoes.
And I remember here at the college, down in one corner of the athletic field, an area was allocated for victory gardens.
There were several of them down there in the Fairfax area. The people would get off their day shift and they'd go out and hoe around in the garden and stuff like that.
In 1942, there were 5,000 gardens in the city, but by June 1943, there were 44,000. Although life without sugar and meat posed a burden for families, adults felt the loss of certain luxuries like alcohol, cigarettes, and coffee.
The thing that I missed and that shocked me when they disappeared, and I mean they disappeared practically overnight, was nylon hose.
Silk was now reprocessed for parachutes, and nylon was used for items like tow ropes. Nylon and silk hose became hot commodities.
There was a huge black market in it. I went to work for Emery Bird Thayers, and my first job there was security of nylon hose.
The Office of Price Administration limited other consumer products as well.
They didn't make cars. There were no refrigerators, no stoves. You couldn't get anything new. You had to buy whatever was used, and you're lucky to find it.
The last civilian automobile rolled off the lines in February of '42. Later that spring, the first gas shortages hit the East Coast. And by mid-May, over 8 million motorists were required to register for gas ration cards.
So you rode the streetcars in those days. If you carpooled, you got an extra gas ration.
You never saw a taxi cab going down the street with one person in it. You had to have 2 or 3 passengers or 2 or 3 stops along the way.
Some companies even reverted back to horse and buggy in a patriotic effort to save gas and tires.
You did absolutely no traveling other than that was essential for the war purpose.
I remember there being signs along the road saying, "Is this trip really necessary?"
And they put a speed limit of, I believe, 45 miles an hour to save rubber.
The funny thing is, we were supposed to turn in all our extra tires, and usually then we would get tires recapped if we needed them.
So pretty soon we had patches on the patches.
With metal diverted to war production, and silk and rubber no longer available since they too came from Japanese-occupied territories, we had scrap drives to make up for the shortages. The iron in one old shovel, Americans were told, could be recycled to make 4 hand grenades.
We saved everything. Tin cans, every scrap of metal that could be found, you saved.
Everybody collected the aluminum. If you had an old coffee pot or some pans that you weren't using, we put them in the scrap heap for the war effort.
Students excelled at this assignment.
The salvage commandos were a unique little group of kids, and we gathered waste grease, newspapers, and tin cans up from people in our assigned areas. Our grade school, Bancroft, received the S flag, which was for salvage. They had a big award ceremony and raised it, and it flew under the American flag throughout the rest of the war.
Collecting waste fat was a nasty task for most people, but it was essential in making ammunition. We were told that 1 pound of grease contained enough glycerin to make 1 pound of black powder. 2 pounds made 5 anti-tank shells. There were other unusual collections. Farm youngsters were given the special task of gathering the replacement for kapok, the material found in life jackets and sleeping bags, since it too came from areas in the Pacific.
And it was decided that the fuzzy stuff in milkweed pods would be a good substitute. So they gave us gunny sacks, and we went out looking for milkweed. And we thought we were doing something really, really important, because maybe we'd save somebody's life.
Scrap drives and victory stamps kindled young patriotic spirits, but the very real aspects of the war never strayed far from their minds.
When Hitler invaded Poland, my father and I began a scrapbook of the headlines out of the Kansas City Star. And every day we would cut and paste and make the scrapbook.
We kept a big map in the school, National Geographic maps, you know, very good maps. And we had pins for everybody that we had any idea where they were.
I do remember hearing grown-ups talk about if the Axis won for occupying the United States, that the plan was to divide it down the Mississippi. Everything east of the Mississippi would be occupied by the Germans, and everything west of the Mississippi would be occupied by the Japanese. And we lived west of the Mississippi. And I was old enough and heard enough grown-ups talk to know that that was bad.
But it was the allure of the air that set imaginations alight.
I was interested in aircraft identification. I made that a hobby, and I could identify silhouettes of the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator and all those. So when I did enter the Navy, I did real well in that area.
I had pictures plastered all over my wall of fighter planes and bombers. And the B-25 was a favorite because I knew it was manufactured here in Kansas City.
And I remember one little booklet that came in a cereal box that had all of the different models of airplanes. And so when an airplane went over the farm, I'd run outside and see if I could figure out what airplane that was.
For children and adults alike, not a day went by without knowing a war was on and news of any kind was craved.
When you go to the movies, first they'd show a cartoon, then they'd show the news of the day.
What we went for were the newsreels, because then we got pictures of what were allowed, of course, of how the war was progressing.
When we'd see Hitler in the newsreels, of what an ugly man. I mean, he was mean looking. We would boo him very loud and, you know, say, kill those Nazis.
That was an exciting thing to me, to see actual pictures from movie tone of the war, of the tanks, of the airplanes.
It was an adventure happening somewhere else, and you got to see it without being in it. You saw it in the movies, in the newsreel, on radio, in comic books, and you just shared vicariously in all those things.
Persuading the American public became a wartime industry for the Office of War Information. Tinged with propaganda, the government printed thousands of posters. They inspired us to fight for victory and sold us on the ideas of recruitment and conservation.
And I remember in the school cafeteria, there was a poster on the wall that said that a grade school in New Jersey had cleaned their plates so well that they only had a cup of garbage for the whole month. And I remember looking around at my classmates and thinking, oh dear, we're not doing that. Well, then suddenly when I was a little older, I realized that probably someplace in New Jersey there was a poster on the wall that said, a grade school in Missouri cleaned their plates so well that they only had a cup of garbage.
More than anything, it was the radio that brought the family together, to listen for news abroad, and perhaps escape from everyday worries.
We did all sit around the radio and look at it as they show in some of the old films while we were imagining what was going on, and the news broadcasters were very dramatic.
If it hadn't been President Roosevelt with his eloquent voice on radio, to the fireside chat as he called it, he kept the American people on the level and aroused them enough to know that we had a job on our hands we had to win.
The fireside chats lifted our heavy spirits, but it was the music that put us in the mood.
We had books that printed the words to all the songs, Frank Sinatra's songs, some of those corny old songs, that Born to Lose and Pistol Packin' Mama, and then some of the war things, you know, Praise the Lord, Pass the Ammunition, and all that silly thing.
Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey, Vaughn Monroe.
Benny Goodman, some of the Charlie Barnett, some of the big bands would come through in those days, and they were a big draw, big bands and big dance floors.
Best music ever made.
Those were foot stamping days, great days. But that didn't mean that we weren't aware of what was going on as far as world affairs were concerned.
In 1939, America had guardedly watched as Hitler's army slowly devoured each European country. Remaining isolationists, we involved ourselves only through the Lend-Lease Act, supplying munitions to Great Britain and Russia, while also giving our own depression-weary people jobs. We assumed we were safe from global entanglement.
If the Japanese had not bombed Pearl Harbor, I don't think we'd been united as we were.
I think it increased the anger of the nation to the point that they was more geared up to do the things they had to support the military and the nation.
The American industry went to work, and you wouldn't believe how fast they converted to making airplanes and tractors and trucks and tanks and ammunition and guns. In fact, a lot was going on right here in Kansas City.
City leaders convinced the War Production Board in D.C. that the Midwest was a prime location for wartime industry, far enough inland from enemy attack, yet central for air, trucking, rail, and river mobility. The board was told to come to Kansas City and wake the sleeping industrial giant. It worked. National companies came to town to build their war machines. Local companies eager to join the fight converted from peacetime to wartime productions. In order to awaken this great sleeping giant of American industry, we needed people. As 13 million men headed into battle, every woman, teenager, retiree, minority, and physically challenged person was called upon to fight our foes with welding guns and machine lathes.
If you went and put a notice in the paper, you would have people all backed up for a mile waiting to get in line and get an application.
Of course, everybody wanted to work in the defense plants because there again, everybody had been so poor for so long.
I was working for 50 cents a day back in the country, and I came down here and was making $1 an hour. Well, I was uptown then.
And there were many people that couldn't go to service because of a health problem or age, so they all went to work as much as they could with these different companies.
People were recruited to just do everything. North American even had blind people that did their job and did it well.
I had already lost a leg, and I knew I wasn't going to be going into combat. And I thought because of the shortage of men that if I couldn't get in the service, why, I could get a job.
When I was 17, I went to work for American Telephone and Telegraph on indoor maintenance with virtually no experience in this kind of equipment. You know, this was an opportunity that came only because of the shortage of manpower.
But it was women who were the main target for work in the defense plants, and not just any kind of work. Rosy riveters and Winnie welders filled the factories and shipyards, stepping in for our fighting GIs.
The women were wonderful. They just dived in and learned their jobs. And of course it was non-traditional for all the women.
You probably would never have thought about working in a place like that otherwise. It was all as foreign to us as going to Europe was to my husband when he went there.
Started out, we had all men. Gradually, we lost the men and turned over to women. They did a hell of a lot better job than the men did. The only thing is about the women, we didn't know how to scold them. So we just figured out the best way to do is to give them hell or whatever it is and then run. Get it clear away. Don't let them get the last word in. And we was okay then.
Defense workers were coming from all walks of life to work in these unfamiliar industries. Training was essential.
A lot of them were like us and came from farm areas and never seen a machine like they had. They had drill presses and they had engine lathes.
I'd never looked at a blueprint before, and that kind of dazzled me.
We had to know the different kinds of metal, the ways to test them. We had to learn rivets and bolts and nuts.
They'd teach you how to rivet, how to use a drill gun to drill the rivet out in case it isn't right.
And so you'd work on the milling machine a little while until you kind of learn how to use that, and then they'd transfer you over to the grinders and you'd learn how to run the grinders. They were trying to keep us from killing ourselves on those things.
The jobs they trained for were as myriad as the products they made.
I was foreman, and then I was a general foreman. I took care of the 3 shifts later on.
I could operate any machine in our department.
I was a welder, Winnie the welder.
I was a riveter and installed aerions. You know the little flaps? It makes those flaps move. That's all I had to know.
And I ran a turret lathe making parts for the B-25.
I did drilling and riveting and all that fine stuff, sheet metal work.
We worked from 7 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night most times.
10 hours a day, 6 days a week.
I had a stamp, an inspector's stamp. My number was 457. I stamped it and it was either rejected or it passed.
Our first chance to show the military that Kansas City could handle large-scale precision production was at Lake City Ordnance in late 1940. People flocked from all over to make the 30 and 50 caliber cartridges for Remington arms.
Practically every member of the family worked here. There was mothers, there were daughters, there were fathers, sons, grandparents, and eventually there were 21,000 people employed here.
From the opening of the plant until it closed in late 1945, Lake City delivered 5.9 billion rounds of ammunition to the armed forces. A short drive from Kansas City, the munitions plant also provided affordable wartime entertainment for families.
We would be able to drive the car close enough that at nighttime we could see tracer bullets. I suppose they were being tested. And again, that made me feel like I was a part of the war, and our community was a part of the war.
Precision in production was also important at Sunflower Ordnance Works near DeSoto, Kansas. The Hercules plant supplied extremely essential, yet extremely volatile cannon and rocket powder. And despite high safety standards, fires and accidents did happen. Some lost their lives. But that didn't prevent Sunflower from becoming the largest rocket powder producing plant in the United States by the end of World War II. Butler Manufacturing was already making steel buildings and refueling tanks for the government when war broke out. But their most remarkable product was the Butler Landing Mat. These 10-foot by 15-inch interlocking steel planks were used as sidewalks, floors, footbridges, and ramps on invasion beaches.
Our first landing mats went over to Omaha Beach, where they first went into Normandy.
Larger combinations of the mats were laid out, allowing the big bombers to land on the sandy Pacific Islands. By war's end, Butler had produced over 29 million square feet of landing mats.
That would have been enough to hook it up from Chicago to San Francisco, back to Kansas City.
The fledgling aviation and electronics industries had become vital for modern warfare, and Kansas City was at the core of production. Pratt & Whitney came to town to manufacture their double Wasp airplane engine for the Navy. 23,000 people built and assembled the intricate machine in the huge complex at Bannister and Troost, called the Wasp Nest.
When I first went there, I seen all these parts all laid all over every place. And I told them, I said, my God, there's a lot of parts. And they kind of laughed at me a little bit. It all stayed in the same building, went over to the assembly. And over in the assembly, they would put it together, and then they would put it in their test cells and test it out.
I remember sometimes when I would have to go down and take something somewhere, walk through where all the test cells were. That was a wild noise.
And we put out an engine faster, more engines, and cheaper and better than what they was doing in Hartford, Connecticut, the parent plant.
Kansas City's sole prime defense contract was for the famous B-25 Billy Mitchell medium bomber. Built by North American Aviation, over 59,000 people toiled at the Fairfax plant, doing whatever it took to create each masterpiece.
The part of the plane that we worked on was the center section. And there were 3 gas bays on each section where the wing would eventually join on. And I would get stuck down in those gas bays, head first down or any other way you could get in there. And all these rivets going like machine guns everywhere. I don't know how I can hear anything to this day, but I have good hearing.
At any one time, approximately 100 airplanes were in some stage of production.
And when you got up to where some of them were the hole in the cell, or maybe there's a wing on, they really looked big. But you look at the size of them compared to the B-29 and different ones, they are definitely a medium-sized plane.
B-25s were also brought back to Kansas City for modification, adding machine guns, cannons, or the latest in electronic equipment.
Most of the plant operation was designing. One foreman probably would find out, well, we need a part like this, and he would take that up to designing department. They would design it, draftsmen would draw it out, and then someone would make a part, and then from there on out, make them in quantity.
To this day, the bomber builders still get a thrill when they see one of their old friends.
But you could hear a B-25 and you knew that was what it was. We just wanted, yay, there's one of ours up there.
Unlike the B-25, the Waco glider was meant to be silent, so you were lucky if you caught a glimpse of one soaring above Fairfax Airport.
You didn't see them very often, but every once in a while you could look up, and they would glide around up there for a while and then come on in and land.
A glider is just a framework of metal piping, and then it's covered with some kind of a fabric. Of course, they're made to be disposable, so there wasn't much to them.
Constructed in the American Royal Buildings, the rugged Invasion glider had a wingspan of 84 feet, 50% greater than the B-25.
That arena was full of welding. All the different pieces and the frame. Well, I was out in the cow pens and the sheep pens. And there was something when it would get dampish. It was just spotless. It was clean, but there would still be that farm smell come in there.
Towed by C-47s into enemy territory, glider pilots made dead stick landings, carrying jeeps, bulldozers, field artillery, and troops.
I never did think anybody in his right mind would ride one of those things into foreign country. But we did, and it worked.
Senator Harry Darby was also instrumental in bringing defense work to the Midwest. At his steelworks, he built locomotive boilers and 1,000 and 4,000-pound bomb casings. But the true heroes were at Caw Point, where the amphibious LCTs and LCMs were built. 2,000 of these landing craft were launched into the confluence of the Missouri and Kansas rivers, making the 1,000-mile journey to New Orleans and then to points beyond.
Well, the launching is like we see in the movies. The LST comes down the ramp and boom, splash, and there's a big splash of water, and everybody shouts and yells, "Hooray!" No, it didn't sink.
In late '43, Navy officials desperately needed 60 of the Darby LCTs, yet river levels were low. With no change after releasing water from a dam upriver, the government demanded that the huge vessels be transported by highway. Bridges were to be destroyed along the way.
We were very fortunate because the night before they were to destroy this bridge work, we had a heavenly rain, and they had enough water that they were able to launch them and get them down.
The following June, the reason for the frenzied orders became clear: D-Day. For fear of the mythical fifth column, no one at Darby could know the true reason for the haste. Security at every defense plant was a must.
When I applied for the job, I had my fingerprints taken and had a background search by the FBI.
There was gates that you went through right where the streetcars let you out, and you had to have a badge. If you didn't have that badge on, you couldn't get in.
And as you went out, you opened your lunch bucket up just to show them as you went out that you didn't have half the tools in your lunch bucket or something.
And you didn't talk to people about the job.
They used to have all these stickers up all around the loose lips sink ships, one I remember so much.
And there were arrests made. People who were suspected of sabotage in one way or another. Maybe because of what they said or how they said it, made people nervous about what their allegiance might be.
In contrast, the defense worker was also rewarded for her hard work with the prestigious Army-Navy E Award, given to companies for meeting production and safety goals. But the honor merely reflected the true goal behind the valiant work ethic.
Maybe that was your brother or your son or somebody you knew that was going to be flying that airplane, and you didn't want to do anything that would make it subject to failing or something.
Kansas City ultimately received 450 war contracts, achieving a major financial goal, with 1% of every American dollar going to firms in Jackson, Clay, and Wyandotte counties. American farmers could also be proud of their wartime effort, producing enough to feed not only our military and civilian populations, but millions of our allies overseas.
Actually, the farmers did very well during the war years. There was rain, the crops were good, the prices were high. Many, many farmers were able to pull themselves out of the Depression because of the war. That was one good thing that came out of it. That was not the way we would have wanted to do it.
Crops were bountiful, but a labor drought arose as sons and fathers went to war. A great deal of farm work was done by the Women's Land Army, putting in as many man-hours as possible. But by 1944, the labor shortage had become severe. The solution was an unusual one. From 1942 through 1946, more than 400,000 German, Italian, and Japanese prisoners of war were interned in the United States. Scattered among 150 main camps and 500 branch camps, these men provided much-needed labor on farms and in non-war-related factories. Several of these subcamps were located around Kansas City. In Liberty, the Miller family contracted their turkey farm to the government to house 600 of Rommel's elite 5th African Corps.
They looked like they were cloned, all blonde, blue-eyed, real physical specimens. I learned how my name should sound in German. Philipp Müller. Philipp Müller, how are you today, Philipp? And they'd throw me around like a sack of sugar.
The German POWs in Leavenworth were captured after D-Day and were amazed when they arrived in the U.S.
They didn't believe they were in New York Harbor when they got there because their propaganda had told them that New York had been absolutely bombed to the ground.
60 to 70 Italian POWs were stationed as close as the Riverside racetrack.
We would talk to the prisoners. A lot of them could speak pretty good English, and they liked it here because they knew that they wasn't going to get shot at.
The Italian POWs even attended Mass at Holy Rosary Catholic Church.
And here were these fellas getting off the trucks in these old gray suits and talking to people in language and listening to a Mass, some of which was in Italian, for their sake. So that's about the closest war ever got to us.
However their time was spent, they were always grateful for a friendly face.
Please take this little handmade jewel case as a Christmas gift. Maybe it sounds like a kind of sentimentalism, but you cannot imagine how we are feeling while we are living behind that terrible barbed wire. Once you shook hands with me, I felt very happy in that moment. Maybe I can repay it after the war. Yours, Gunther Bishop.
Perhaps it was easy to befriend the German and Italian prisoners because we had neighbors of those nationalities. The same civility, however, was not extended to the American-born Japanese, or Nisei. Due to the fear of sabotage, entire populations of Nisei were forced into internment camps. Dr. William Lindsay Young, the president of Park University, then Park College, was concerned about the college students in these camps. Through a government agency, he was able to help some of them attend select Midwestern colleges. 15 Nisei came to Park. Well known for international outreach, the Park student body embraced the newcomers. The citizens of Parkville, however, did not.
As a matter of fact, the mayor was quoted in one of the New York newspapers as saying, if California doesn't want those Japs, we don't want them. So a number of the merchants downtown said, well, if they come down here and want to buy groceries at our grocery store or something at the drugstore down here, we're not going to serve them. So one of the things that the rest of we students were told on the campus was, don't ever let them go down there alone by themselves. Always make sure that one of you or more goes with them. That's the way we did it.
The Nisei graduates went on to great careers and look back on their time at Park fondly, illustrated by a donation letter to the college from Dr. William Yamamoto, a distinguished professor at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School.
And he went on to say that in a time when life was dreadful for me, Park College saved me. And so I make this contribution to Park College in memory of that. One of the most touching letters I've ever seen.
In September of 1940, 2 months after the fall of France, Congress passed the Selective Service Act, requiring adult males between the ages of 21 and 35 to register for the draft. National Guard and Reserve units were ordered to active duty for 1 year, preparing for the worst. But when it happened, we were still caught off guard.
I think it was a courteous thing on Japan's part, but I also think that some of our military should have known that such a fleet was moving across the Pacific.
And heard it on the radio, and immediately I thought, well, this little boy's going to go to the Army.
Overnight, recruiting offices were crammed with enraged citizens ready to defend their homeland. Kansas City quickly filled draft quotas, beginning with Noel Craven. Noel and his family were celebrating his 17th birthday when they heard the devastating news of Pearl Harbor. The next morning, Noel was the first recruit in line at the Navy enlistment office in Kansas City.
I woke up the next day and Noel was gone, and that was the last time I saw him, was the day of his birthday.
Noel shipped out on a tanker as a gunner's mate, and during the Coral Sea Battle, became one of our first casualties.
And he was killed by a plane that they had shot down, and it crashed on the ship. Never seen my father cry until then.
Men like Noel were known as the Avengers of Pearl Harbor, volunteering for service. Yet men who were drafted did not begrudge their patriotic duty. Even those exempt from service, declared either 4F or as an essential worker, wished to do their part.
They didn't want a fella with one leg in anywhere, which I still think was a big mistake. They could have used me and let somebody release somebody else for active combat if that was their concern.
My dad tried to join I remember as a child him coming in one evening all distraught and actually almost in tears. He tried to join the Army and the Army refused to take him. They said, "You'll do more good staying on the farm right where you are." He felt like he wasn't doing his part.
The new recruits traveled to Fort Leavenworth for induction, where they took physicals and were assigned either Army or Navy. From there, they went to boot camp or other training sites throughout the states. The circumstances also called for accelerated officers training at various colleges and universities. Locally, these 90-day wonders could be found in a Naval V-12 unit at Park College, or on the campus of KU, training in the Merchant Marines, Coast Guard, and Naval Air Corps. In Kansas City, the Army Signal Corps set up schools specializing in radio and radar communications. And as a hotbed for aviation, it was not unusual to see glider pilots and paratroopers circling the skies around local airfields like Fairfax, Grandview, and Richards Field. Naval aviation cadets also received primary training at the Naval Air Station in Olathe, Kansas, 25 miles south of Kansas City, 1,000 miles from the nearest coast.
One of the reasons was that it was in the center part of the United States. Obviously, if the Japanese had wanted to come in to bomb, they could not have made it from the west coast to here. Who would believe the Navy be in the middle of the United States? There was no pond and just no lakes or nothing here.
In the first 2 years, nearly 4,500 cadets were phased through NAS Olathe, including John Glenn and Bob Barker. The cadets trained in two-seater biplanes nicknamed Yellow Perils, which prepared them for their next assignment. In 1942, women were finally given the chance to join the military, if only to provide non-combat jobs in office and communications work.
We were trying to take the place of soldiers. We were just trying to do the jobs behind the lines where it was safe and where a able-bodied man could pick up the gun and go.
Just as their male counterparts, female recruits were sent to boot camp for training.
Our basic training was very similar to the same that the men got at that time. We did the same calisthenics, only not quite so many. We all saluted the officers and then stuck our tongues out at the sergeants when they were past us.
350,000 women served their country under the unusual acronyms of WACS, WAVES, WASPs, and SPARS. NAS Olathe was home to 40 WAVES, or Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service.
I was a flight orderly in Naval Air Transport Service, and we carried supplies, cargo, and if we had weight room, we would carry boys, Army, Navy, or Marines, that were trying to get across the United States.
Nor were the women Air Service pilots at Fairfax relegated to desk jobs. Instead of toting cargo, the WASPs actually piloted planes fresh from area factories to the war front. The women had to be skilled in flying every type of plane imaginable, including the huge B-29s and B-17s.
Women flew our B-25s out of Fairfax, out to the coast where they were loaded and shipped to the field, and some of them are still alive and still bragging about it.
Whether they were fresh recruits on their way to training or seasoned soldiers heading to the front, it was inevitable that most would pass through Union Station. And no matter how long their stay, the servicemen could always find a home away from home with the local USOs.
I believe the USO served one of the great purposes of morale. It was a place that an individual who was in a strange area and knew basically no one could go and relax.
There were about 10 or 12 schools. They were airline schools and radio schools, and there must have been 10,000 or more servicemen attending these schools in Kansas City. So we had a lot of local fellows who were here, and we were, of course, outnumbered.
Local women volunteered as senior and junior hostesses at the various clubs, lending a touch of home by sewing on patches or chevrons, or by simply talking to the lonely recruits. The USO is also a place to dance.
Oh, I never learned to dance till after I went to the canteen, but out of desperation, I guess they taught me how to dance. It was either that or not have anyone to dance with.
Although the USO provided relief from the war, it was while our boys were overseas that they most yearned for a sense of home.
I wrote to some that I never knew, never saw, just writing letters, because my brother had asked me to write to some of his friends.
I wrote to him every day. He wrote to me maybe once or twice a month, and that was understandable when they were in combat.
Miniaturized V-mail encouraged people to write and helped minimize postal bulk. Regardless, censorship proved an obstacle for most people.
Ever so often, apparently, they would write something that was censored, and it'd be blacked out, and you sometimes whole sentences, and no matter how you held it up to the light, you couldn't read it.
That's why a lot of military guys never wrote home, because what could you say? You couldn't say what you're doing. You couldn't say where you were.
All too often, letters were returned to sender.
A lot of them would write, and then pretty soon you didn't hear from him anymore, and you wondered, did they lose the address? Were they not living anymore, or what? You never knew.
And one of the really sad and scary times was when the telegram came.
Receiving a telegram usually meant the worst for most families. So when the telegram came to the Wiseman home that Martin Wiseman had been taken prisoner by the Germans, the family sighed with relief.
Everybody was happy that he was safe, and thought they must have to treat them right because of the Geneva Convention. So life just kind of went on, and we just waited for news and did get a few letters from him. All he could say was, "They are treating me well, and I'm looking forward to coming home, and I want a date with my WAC. I'm very proud of her."
The date, however, never took place. Barbara's father died of pneumonia, still a prisoner of Germany. As a show of absolute commitment to the war, living room windows displayed banners with a silver star for each loved one in service. Families like the Wisemans changed their silver star to gold, indicating the ultimate sacrifice. Dedicating themselves to the ideology that we live by today, the men and women of our military actually fought the battles that we only know by name: Normandy, Anzio, Tripoli, Midway, Corregidor. So many battles, so much to gain, so much to lose.
You have no idea what fear the man has when he sees shells exploding all around and machine guns shattering. And
Well, I don't know how you describe when you're going down the road as a platoon and you start to get fired upon, and you run for the ditch, if you can make the ditch.
there were times that we didn't even take our clothes off for 60 days. No new socks, no nothing, no underwear, no nothing for 60 days. K rations, peoria. You were frightened the majority of the time, and then you got used to combat and used to artillery rounds, mortar rounds, and the machine gun firing. You figure today's your last day, so you live a full day.
Living the whole day was the only luxury for our American prisoners of war.
We had rifles and pistols, and they had tanks. Couldn't very well fight a tank with a pistol.
The fellas were pretty bad off from diarrhea, dysentery. They were taking them out 50 a day and burying them in one big hole.
We were
very downhearted and didn't know what was going to happen to us. But I don't believe we ever lost our patriotism.
As our POWs hoped for rescue, the global war raged on. By early 1945, the tide was turning for the Allied forces, and it looked as if the war in Europe was coming to a close. But another era came to a close first, with the death on April 12th of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
He had been in office since the beginning of time, it seemed like.
So it was quite a shock because we knew no other president.
Poor Mr. Truman was kind of the hayseed from Missouri, you know.
No, a lot of people didn't like him, but you won't find a serviceman in World War II that won't appreciate what he did for us.
A month later, Nazi Germany surrendered. Celebrations erupted throughout Europe. But for most Americans, it was bittersweet.
And of course, that first taste of victory was wonderful.
And I'll tell you, my knees shook. I had enough of that front line artillery stuff.
Some of my girlfriends and I went to church, and that was about the size of it. I mean, the battle in the Pacific was still going on.
And we had paid a high price in the Pacific. Every island we took was a tough fight.
We were told that these people are not going to give up. We are going to have to invade Japan.
I know the Japanese were preparing themselves to fight to the last man.
Well, it looked like it was going to go on forever and ever and ever. Thank God for Harry Truman.
When they dropped the atomic bomb, we all cheered. There were jokes, I hope they have a dozen more. As far as we were concerned, we would have been happy to bomb the Japanese back to the Stone Age.
You hate to say it. You was glad it happened.
What happened in Nagasaki was terrible. What happened in the Battle of the Bulge was terrible. I don't know anything about wars. It's nice.
Right or wrong, the war was over. When the announcement came on August 15th of Japan's capitulation, a spontaneous spree erupted the world over.
There was this parade at 6 o'clock in the morning and church bells ringing in the background.
We went downtown, and it was like New Year's Eve. I mean, everybody was in the streets, and everybody was hugging everybody and kissing everybody, and if you didn't kiss somebody, they grabbed you.
Somebody got up on the marquee at Jones' store down there with a trombone and was playing and singing. So it was kind of a wild night. I do think the most destruction anybody did was some of the hotels down there of slashing pillows and shaking the feathers out the windows down there.
Others observed the war's end in remembrance.
We had a very nice dinner and we had a few drinks and we had a short prayer for all the boys that we knew that were never going to be able to come back and party with us anymore.
Even with the war over, there was work to be done. Internationally, America assisted in the reconstruction of Europe and Japan. Nationally, we began the deconstruction of wartime industries. The War Assets Administration chose Kansas City as one of 3 sites to account for and process excess supplies coming in from all over the world. The government's contract with the manufacturers prevented any equipment gained or produced during the war from returning to the open market after the war, protecting their peacetime profits.
And then depending upon what the instructions were from the government, it seemed bad, but you would stand there while the guard would literally destroy a lot of new machinery.
And the poor parts, they hit them with a sledgehammer and throw them in a boxcar, and away they went. We worked like the devil on them, and then they just throw them away in the boxcar. Hit it with a sledgehammer and let it go.
But more importantly, the end of the war brought our boys home.
That's really when we started flying the boys, the wounded boys back from the Pacific. So we had many hospital flights, and they were really the most rewarding work that we did in the service. They were very ill, they were in litters, many of them could not walk, and they never complained, no matter how hot it was or how cold it was. They were so happy to be coming home.
But what was fun was to see the women, the young girls and the women, when their husbands and friends would come home. You know, that was just a show all on its own.
The return of the GIs meant readjustments for many.
How do you assimilate 6 million people back into a society that has changed a great deal in the time they've been gone? How do you do that?
Women got to get out in the workforce. Of course, they had to get back out of it when the war was over, because we had all these men coming home, lickety-split, with no jobs, you know.
The war was over. You know, that's why we were there, was because of the war. And we expected not to have a job when the war was over.
But the war opened the door to new roles for women and minorities in society, setting the stage for the social reform in later decades. The end of the war brought about other changes as well.
We began to move away from a primarily rural society to an urban society. The housing developments that were built after the war became a pattern for the rest of this century.
We became a consumer society for sure.
50 years later, we look back on World War II with mixed emotions.
It was the only war in my lifetime, anyway, that everybody felt like we had to get into and win.
I heard less complaining then than any time since in my life.
If it wasn't for the war, I never would have been anything but a little old halfway mechanic down there. After that, I ended up as the superintendent of the department at Kansas City store.
When it was over, a little bit of color and interest went out, and there was a kind of a plateau of living.
I think the romance is in the history of it.
We fought the war so that all of us would have the right to be able to say and do the things that we do.
The cost was horrible, but at the time there was no choice.
The men that were wounded and that were killed did more than I had ever done.
When I was out on my roller skates and enjoying my youth, they were out in savings.
I felt like maybe that I was doing something really right, not only for my country and for me, but for the world.
I think at the time it really brought out the best in everybody. I think it really did.
Production funding for Over Here has been provided by gifts from Fred and Lou Hartwig of Roland Park and Mark and Nancy Gilman of Overland Park, Kansas.